Hello, I'm Liz Martin. I'm an expert on the oil and gas industry, and I was a trader at BP for a long time, and I've been a consultant for 12 years. And I thought it was worth having a conversation today about what's happening with jet fuel. It's in the news a lot now that we're going to run out of jet fuel or there's going to be problems with supply. So I thought I would explain what's going on. Now, firstly, the problem with jet fuel in the UK and in Europe is that we don't produce enough here. So we have to import. So in the last 10 years, really, the number of oil refineries that bring in crude oil and produce jet fuel, as well as petrol and diesel, ship fuel and other products, has gone down. So we refine less crude oil and make less jet. Now, that means we have to import. And whilst refining in Europe has been declining, refining in the Middle East has gone up, as well as in China and India and other parts of the world, especially in the east of the world. So now we import our jet fuel from many places, but largely from the Middle East. So, for example, Al Zour refinery in Kuwait is an exporter of jet fuel to the UK. Now, with the closure of the Straits, clearly that jet fuel is not coming anymore. And so we need to solve the problem. There's two ways to solve that problem. Is either buy it from somewhere else or use less. So demand destruction. So in buying it from somewhere else or getting it from somewhere else, we have been looking at buying from the Americas, from the US Gulf Coast. There's a lot of oil refineries there, used to supply America mostly, but does export sometimes distillates to the Mediterranean, and now is exporting jet to us. So to do that, then the price of jet fuel in Europe has to be high enough to want them to export from the US, put it on a ship and send it all the way over. So with sufficiently high prices, that will pull jet in from America, West Africa, and also India. Now, with Indian or Eastern European jet fuel and Turkish jet fuel, the problem with that is that those refineries rely on Middle Eastern crude oil to run the refineries, and have been running Russian crude oil as well, and by that I mean Turkey and India. Now, there were restrictions placed on countries that were using Russian crude oil and then exporting it into Europe and the UK recently, although those have been released because of the closure of the Straits and the problem those refineries have had in not having enough crude oil to supply their own countries and to export to us. But that is due to run out this weekend, so we'll have to see if that's extended or not, so they can continue to run Russian crude oil to produce jet and diesel to export to us. So that's some problems there. And in America, the other problem is that we're getting to driving season, and Americans drive a lot more in the summer than they do in the winter, and that means that they need more petrol demand. Now, in a refinery, you make roughly 10% of the crude oil that comes out as jet. It can be 9, 12, somewhere in that range, and it depends on your type of refinery. But there's not a lot you can do to change that. You can't suddenly say, I'll make 50% jet. It doesn't work that way. You're limited by the quality of the crude oil and the refining kit that you have there. You can change the quality of the crude oil, and in another video we'll talk all about how crude oil is very different depending where it comes from, and some innately have more jet in than others. But it's not that easy to do, and it makes a marginal difference. You can also slightly change how much diesel you make compared to jet fuel, or slightly change how much naphtha, which goes into petrol or chemicals, at the other end that you make. But again, it's not going to swing 10%, is going to be a small amount of percentage movements. So we can't suddenly just make a lot more. Now, do we have stocks of jet? Well, countries in Europe and in the UK are required to hold strategic stocks in case of emergency, and those are held typically by companies, but most of them are crude oil. There are jet stocks, and it depends which country you're in, how many days cover, they call it, how many days of use you've got of jet fuel that you'll have in your specific country, and whether they'll be released to you. It's not a panacea. It is not going to solve it forever if all the jet fuel is released, and in some countries they have very, very little, so just have a few days cover. So that's another consideration. Will sustainable aviation fuel solve the problem? Well, not yet. Now in the UK and Europe, you have to have 2% of your jet fuel has to be from sustainable aviation fuel, and those percents go up. So by 2030, it's 6% in the EU and 10% in the UK, and it goes up year by year in the UK. So again, it's a small percentage. Can that go up? It has gone up a little bit, actually. I noticed it last month, or is it March, was 2.5% of jet fuel was sustainable aviation fuel. But it's much more expensive. So even with the big rally in price, then sustainable aviation fuel is more expensive. And also, sustainable aviation fuel is largely made from used cooking oil, which is imported from China, or at least 50%, roughly 50% of the imports of used cooking oil comes from China. So with sustainable aviation fuel, you're almost just swapping your reliance on where that comes from. There's not much sustainable aviation fuel itself that's traded yet, but in the future that looks like it will come from Asia and from China as well. So even going forward, there's a hook there. There are many projects to develop sustainable aviation production here, that's not just from used cooking oil, but newer fuels, or very easily said renewable fuels of non-biological origin, which come from hydrogen, really from wind power, driving hydrogen, and you can make sustainable aviation fuel from that. There are projects around that, but they are far from being completed. They're not even started being built yet in most cases around Europe. So that's far off. And again, those are even more expensive than the biological fuels, UCO, sustainable aviation fuel. So that's not a panacea to solve our problems. What is happening is demand destruction. So anyone that's done basic economics will know that higher prices mean less demand, and the percentage to which that change depends on how elastic or how quickly it moves to price. But I've certainly noticed, and you probably too, that if you go to book a flight, it's much more expensive than it was a few months ago, and that's because the price of jet has gone up. And jet will go up with the price of crude oil and go down with crude oil, but not in the same percentage. So sometimes it will go up more, and that's called the jet crack, the difference between crude oil and jet, and that crack has gone up a lot as well. But at higher overall prices, there is higher prices of air travel, and therefore less demand. Also, airlines that have pre-bought all their jets, well, that's nice that they pre-bought it, but sometimes they have not, and then they have been cutting flights. So Lufthansa cancelled 22,000 flights, and certainly we're seeing other airlines do that now. I saw a flight when I was in St. Lucia, and British Airways cancelled my flight back, but that's, I don't know if that was price related or not, for other reasons. But still, we're hearing about lots of flight cancellations, and it's certainly in the press. And that does begin to solve some of the problem. If you have less demand, then that reduces the amount that you need to import. Have we seen stockouts? Not yet. A few days here and there, but nothing too dramatic. Will we? Well, certainly stocks get lower and get used up. It puts more strain on the system, and therefore it's more likely. And as we've already said, we've seen flights being cancelled. So there is certainly strain on the system, and the longer it goes on, the worse that gets, and the more that stocks run down. And so the problem becomes more and more likely, and prices will have to go up, and demand will have to be destroyed, or we'll have to pay more than other countries to pull it here and pull it away from other places. So, and the other thing I'd say is it sort of raised a bit of a spotlight that the fact that we do have this supply chain risk in our system in Europe, that we are dependent. And NATO have got a pipeline in Europe that they can say we need to divert supply from that pipeline, so they can requisition it in the short term to say, right, we need it now for emergency supplies. We haven't seen that, and of course that wouldn't really solve the problem because it's a cumulative amount of molecules that we don't have enough of in Europe. But that's more for war needs, if they need to fly a lot very quickly, and it gets diverted to, or prioritised to go to military bases or not. So, but certainly it's just raised the question of energy security even more. Anyway, thanks for listening to me. I hope that explained. I'll put my email address on the YouTube account so you can email me if you've got any questions. Nice to see you. Bye.